Hi. I'm the Tea Free Zone. This is Veronica Monet. And I have with me somebody I really, really like. She invited me on her webinar a few months ago, and she's just such a dear love. She is coming at us all the way from Germany today. And her name is Pia Prana Muggerud. And of course, I totally murdered that last name.
No, you did not. It was
Did I say it
great.
right?
Yes.
Pia, you're not actually, are you originally from Germany? Because I don't think so. I think you're from a Scandinavian country, aren't
I
you?
am.
Which one?
I am Norwegian.
Norwegian.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, I don't get a lot of practice saying Norwegian last names, but I'm really glad I got it right this time.
You did a great job. I think most people when they see it and they look at it and I go, just say Pia. Just use the first name and everyone kind of relaxes.
Well, I love Pia. That's a great name. You know,
Thank you.
before I read your bio and let everybody know about your wonderful self, I want to just let everybody know we're going to be talking about the good girl syndrome. And this is something you actually consider yourself a recovering good girl.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's going to be really a lot of fun. I think I've been mostly a bad girl most of my life, but I got a good girl in there too who overextends and she's codependent. She's just so codependent. Um, so anyway, thanks for joining us. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Pia here. She's a women's personal mastery and leadership coach, a holistic counselor, and a body dynamic breathwork and trauma release practitioner. That's a lot, Pia. You're really a
That's a
healer.
mouthful, right?
You're out to heal people. I love that.
Oh,
Um,
hell yeah.
She draws on a rich background of therapeutic trainings and experience in spiritual studies, awareness training, and realizing and standing in her own truth and how to share in love, courage, and dignity. And she's also a learning love teacher. And she works to bring awareness and acceptance actually, to the wounds carried from childhood that affect our adult lives and relationships. And I think that this is one of the places where you and I really resonate is how do we heal our wounds so that we can be more conscious, more awake, and more present right now today and fully
Mhm.
enjoy our life.
Mhm.
Um, I think I'd really like to dive into our topic now, Pia. Are you ready to lay it on us? What the heck is a good girl syndrome?
Well, a few years ago, I mean, quite a few years ago, you could look up a good girl in the dictionary and my face. There would be a picture of my face in the dictionary. So I know it pretty well. So there, actually, the term comes from, you mentioned codependency a moment ago. It comes from codependency, actually. But if we look at, if we go way back to our childhood, and many of us, I would say most people, they grow up in with some sort of dysfunction in the family. And what do children do when there's dysfunction? Now, the original term for some of these roles that kids take on when they're little actually comes from alcoholic families. But then the term, these roles have then been widened more, that they happen not just in alcoholic families but also in general in families where there's dysfunction. And so children, many of us, we probably go, well, it could be that you grow up with could be alcoholism, could be violence, could be some sort of traumas that you're experiencing as a child. And of course, unlike the family animal kingdom, where little baby animals, they can be independent fairly early. Of course, human babies would die if we try to be independent until we're fairly old, right? So we look for ways, how can we function, how can we even make things better in the home? So we internalize, and I know all this would make quite a lot of sense to you with your background, but we internalize all that is happening in the family or with our caretakers, and we think, well, mommy and daddy are not happy, it must be something wrong with me. or daddy's very angry at mummy, must be something wrong with me. And so, as little kids, we then look for how can we even create some balance or make things happier in the family. And the good girl or the pleaser is just one of those roles. Now, go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to say, yeah, you're right. A very dysfunctional family, a lot of abuse, all kinds of abuse, domestic violence, incest, a lot of control issues, raging, and things like that. So, but it it wasn't so much that I thought it was my fault as I definitely thought I've got to fix this. So I ended up developing a very acute sense of what mood shifts were taking place in both of my parents. And I would try to intercept the bad mood or the bad acting out by soothing them, comforting them, somehow or another trying to placate them.
Hmm.
It was kind of like I was functioning as um, a fire extinguisher, try to put out the fire before it burned down the house, kind of thing, you know?
Totally.
Yeah. And my
Yeah.
parents often said, I remember my mom and I said, "You always know what I'm feeling. Nobody else in our family does." And I think, yeah, well, it's just my survival mechanism to
Totally, right?
figure out what you're
And
feeling.
the challenge with this also is that we become then almost like hyper vigilant because all our cues for how the world works is outside and usually with other people. And
Yeah,
that's where then, the pleaser um the pleaser or good girl or good boy could be both, of course,
totally.
but that's just one of the roles, right? So imagine you could also be the hero, and you're the straight A student, and you're doing all the right things, because then instead of the dysfunction that's going on in the family, you're bringing all that attention to look at my report card, or look at I hit a home run in my sport, or whatever that is.
Right, right.
Or you could be the one that screws up and does the opposite of the hero, right? So now you're the one you're getting, you're failing your classes, you're getting into trouble. And then suddenly all that attention that is the dysfunction in the family, oops, go to you. So there's kids take on and it's not necessarily, this is not necessarily a conscious choice we're making, but we
No,
take on all these roles. And in my world, I happen to become this pleaser. And much like what you also describe, Veronica, in your family, it's like you get very highly sensitive to what's going on. Or that was also my story. What's going on with mum, or in my case, much more mum, but there was a lot of fighting in the home. So then it was like, well, I'm going to do all these nice things in hope that it would create more calmness,
yeah,
and
yeah,
my parents would be happier.
yeah. And of course, then we carry that pattern into our adult life, so that when we enter into relationship and there's any kind of conflict or discord, we immediately start to think it's our job to rescue. And it's really interesting. Before you and I got on to here today, I was in a therapy session, and my therapist called out a part of me that was trying to rescue. It's so automatic that I don't even notice that I'm trying to rescue.
Hmm.
But it's like an ingrained survival mechanism, and it might not be obvious, like in actions. She's like really following my energies and watching where my attention goes. But it's really can be kind of daunting to try to stop doing that. And Pia, do you think that this good girl syndrome is related to another term a lot of us have heard about, which is codependency?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
How
Absolutely.
do you see them as being same, different? Because I have my own thoughts on that, but I want to hear yours first.
Okay. So all the roles that we take on, be it a good girl or hero or whatever, is with the aim to make things better, makes things better. And what we rely on the other to also feel better. So if I'm needed by you, if I've done, see, I've done something and I've been really good and I've taken care of, let's say one of my parents, and I'm relying on them to be better in order for me to feel good. So there's this like, they rely on me to this role I've taken on, and I rely on them to then respond in the way that I need in order to feel good about myself and about the world as a whole. So if, and my husband's next door, but he will quite often say to me, I don't want you to fix anything. I'm just sharing. And like you said also, it's like, oh, but I have so much to give and I can really help you feel better. And
Yeah.
when he said that, I know I don't, but I can see how easily I can go into this, he doesn't need me. Or what have
Yeah.
I got to give? What will he love in me if I'm not always there taking care and doing all these things? So part of the, since we're talking about the good girl, part of the good girl, I'm relying on the other to feel good about myself.
Yes. And that is very definitely a codependency pattern. I know when I got divorced in 2004, one of the things that I was struck with was I didn't have a project to fix anymore. And so whatever complaints I had about my ex-husband, and I'm not saying that they weren't valid complaints. Obviously, we got divorced for some very good reasons.
Mm,
In our case, he had relapsed around drugs and alcohol, so that's a showstopper for me. I'm just not going to
mm,
be in a marriage where that's happening. Um, but all of that scrutiny got turned on myself now. I'm alone in a mountain cabin writing my first book, and I'm realizing that whatever criticisms and judgments I had about him, however valid they were, that energy was busy trying to fix him and solve him. And now all of a sudden it was back on me. And I'm really convinced that codependency is oftentimes um, a kind of a way of hiding from our own self hatred. Like we have
mm,
criticisms about ourselves. It's so much
mm.
easier to go fix another person.
And
You
it's
know.
so much easier to, all my focus is outward. I don't have to then look at my own behavior or my own dysfunction or my own shame, etc. Right? And so, in fact, I I have this model that I call the inner compass, and it's really about going against my instinct of the good girl, which is to go out. And my radar for everyone else is on high alert. And there's sometimes, and being a counselor and a coach, I see how easy it is for people to come to me and want me to listen to them. And sometimes afterwards I'll be like, there people are always talking about themselves. They're not asking about me. And then I catch myself because it's also quite convenient,
I've been
right?
there,
Exactly
Pia.
what.
I have. I thought, oh, people are so self-obsessed. They're just talking about themselves. They never ask about me. I've been there, and this was probably several years ago. I would. That's your comfort zone.
Mhm,
If you want to be around people who actually would ask about you, start sharing about you. Oh well, now that would make me vulnerable, wouldn't it?
mhm.
Yeah. But I have
Exactly.
become vulnerable, and it feels so good to be human.
But also, that's, I suppose, the journey. And you and I both have done it I mean, you just shared about your therapy session a minute ago, right? So it's like you and I both are on this journey where we're not imagining that we're at some end destination. We're still
Oh,
working out our stuff, right? And
absolutely.
that's why I say I'm a recovering good girl, right? Because I don't assume that none of these patterns are gonna. or they're just magically gone. I think that would definitely be spiritual bypassing if I think
Oh,
that, oh, that's all,
yeah.
it's sneaking behind the surface, you know?
Totally, and it's a journey that, I I get tired of this saying, but because it's so cliche, but it's so true too, and that is the layers of the onion, and I've been on a recovery journey now for over 35 years.
Mm,
I got clean and sober in 1985, and I actually had to get in therapy a couple months before I got sober, otherwise I probably couldn't have gotten sober. Um,
yeah.
and I just it's a beautiful journey to me. That's it's this is my own worldview. I didn't come here just to have accomplishments and possessions, or have a comfortable life that satisfies my needs. It's
Mm,
really I'm very passionately connected with the growth process, because I
mm,
feel like that's why I'm here. I'm here to grow. So if I'm not actively doing something in that direction, I think there's two grooves here. You can just kind of grow old, which is kind of calcifying and getting entrenched in your ways and thinking you got it all figured out. And that's kind of a slow death. Or you could be constantly reinventing yourself and creating new awarenesses about yourself and growing and expanding, which
mm.
is, to my way of thinking, a lot more dynamic.
Oh, and you talk about creating. You said creating, and I totally agree. And I would also say that our work is also about remembering,
Mm.
because, you know, if you can imagine when speaking more to our listeners, but if you imagine when we're born, we're just pure essence, right? We are just pure love,
Yeah.
joy, trust, peace,
Mm.
passion, creativity. Like we are just perfect when we're born.
Yeah.
And so I actually, part of the work that I do, I use this model where, so there's three circles, and the inner circle is the essence, like that's just pure essence. And the next layer is what we call the wounded vulnerability. And
Mm.
you spoke about vulnerability just a moment ago, right? And so the wounded vulnerability is where that layer is where our shame lives, or our fears and our sadness, our self-loathing, our anxiety, anger, all that that is wounded sits around our essence. And then finally, the third layer is where all our compensation is. So our roles, for example, is are part of our compensations. Part of our compensations is what you're sharing about with our addictions, can be another compensation, right? And so the peeling of the onion is then about how can we, what happens if we get out of that comfort zone of being the pleaser, or being a rebel for that matter, because that has a role as well. And to peel off those layers, to have enough courage to then move into that vulnerability that you talked about, and being having that courage to go into those places that are so painful, like the shame. And of course, I want to use that word, especially since we're in your particular podcast, but of
Yeah.
course, shame is such a big piece of why so many people do not want to go there, because it just feels so hard, and it feels like impossible. Like, how will love exist if I share this part of me that I'm so ashamed of,
And
if I reveal
everybody,
this part?
as the shame-free zone, I have a lot of knowledge of people's shameful secrets, and everybody's got some. Um, I I expose more about myself than anybody I know, but I don't recommend it actually. That's just my unique path through life. There's lots of repercussions for being this open and transparent. But at the same time, I usually say, well, I have a couple of secrets I'm not ready to share yet. And but for me it's always a yet, because I want to get to this place where I've matured around the topic and I've healed around it, and then I have something worthwhile to share. And to me, to
Mm,
share my journey around drugs, alcohol, incest, rape, domestic violence is a way to add meaning to that suffering, because now I'm actually sharing something that might be helpful to other people. And it's one of the reasons that I became a relationship coach. But Pia, you were talking about the courage to face those wounds. For me, there was no choice. As somebody who is severely addicted to cocaine and alcohol, my freedom was tied to my ability to be rigorously honest. That's part of the 12-step program I went into. And if I couldn't at least get honest with myself, my higher power, and my sponsor, I was probably going to die.
mm,
So back against the wall, I'm being pushed into that. And I've noticed a lot of people in 12 step have a larger capacity to be more forthright and honest about their past than most people that I know, most people that I
mm.
meet. So,
Yeah.
but it's survival. It's like, well, I have to do this or die. So choose. What do you suggest for people who don't have that addiction that they're trying to kick, and still feel weighed down by these secrets, or this past, the wounding, the vulnerabilities, and they're having a hard time finding that courage?
Mm. Well, first of all, I think that even some of these roles, like we're talking about the good girl now, that can definitely be seen as an addiction as well. Because like if that's all you know, and that kind of gives you a sense of meaning and even a sense of the world is okay.
Yeah.
Like if an alcoholic takes a drink and oh, now the world is okay. It's a
Right.
little bit like that as well. And
Okay.
one of the things that one of the many hats that I wear is I'm a biodynamic breath and trauma release practitioner.
Mm.
And it's a type of breath work where you, as the name would suggest, it's a way that we can release trauma from the body. And one of the amazing things I learned as I do this type of work is that, first of all, most people don't breathe very, very deeply. Mostly the people don't even necessarily engage their diaphragm very much. They breathe up here somewhere,
Yeah.
kind of like how many people function. They function here,
Yes.
up, right? And
Right.
so one of the things that is so important is, and I don't think this is the first step, but I really needed to say this now. And that is that to be willing to feel your feelings. And the truth is around breath is that if you want to stop yourself from feeling, you could just stop breathing deeply.
Yeah.
And therefore, so for example, when we're doing breath work and we're telling people to breathe deeply, one of the first things that's going to come is the emotions that are going to come.
Yeah.
And they're usually the ones that have been sitting under the surface because they're not the ones that are socially acceptable, like anger or rage
Yeah.
or grief, all these things that are too much for society to handle in conversation. We do that in the privacy of our own homes. But I think and this is one of the pieces that I talk a lot about to people, is that it's okay to feel. It's okay to go there. And so when you talk about saying, your story is actually, your journey has become that of, I can be, or I'm putting words in your mouth, but you can be this light of saying, I've gone through all of this,
Yeah.
and look here, I'm still here.
Yeah.
I'm still here to tell the tale. And so to speak up about the things that are difficult, like, and our last conversation that you had, and it's like you don't hold anything back in a way, like you're so honest about your journey. And I think part of it is for those of us that are a little bit further along our journey, is to really talk openly about just our emotional world. And so instead of this, how are you? Oh, I'm good, I'm fine. It's to be able to say, you know what? I'm having a bit of a hard time.
Yeah.
And to know that it's not about to for anybody to fix anything.
No.
And for me, one of the biggest things that supported me was to have start creating a people around me that I can trust,
Yeah. Yeah.
and really seeking out people that are seekers. I mean, I very much see myself as a seeker, and that is, I go way down there, and I kind of like what you were sharing as well. That's part of my role in this life, is like growth and depth and the willingness to go inside. But I think that you can do that with yourself. But when you have, and I think that's probably the beauty of 12 step as well, is that there's like this community of people. It doesn't, I'm not talking from any experience, so
Right.
hopefully you can correct me if I'm saying something wrong. But I have friends that have done the 12-step program,
Yeah.
and you're kind of all in the same boat. So it kind of opens up like a space where, wow, Veronica just shared, wow, you're giving me permission and even courage to do the same.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
to seek out
Yeah.
communities or people that where you can almost like borrow other people's nervous system. So if you don't quite have the courage yet, you can
Yes.
like borrow other people's nervous system. And finally, oh, after a few weeks or months, oh, now I'm ready to.
Yes. And that is actually, Vander Kolk's best-selling book, The Body Keeps the Score. He talks about ways to treat trauma. And CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, is actually not a good way to treat trauma. If you've got trauma from being raped or assaulted, or something else, if you've been diagnosed with PTSD, or if you just have trauma, the things that do work are things like yoga, EMDR, which is they do this in front of your eyes, or sometimes you get a
Mm,
thing, it's bilateral stimulation. Basically, you can also do it like this. And one of the things, he doesn't specifically say 12 step, but he talks about being in groups where other people are talking about the same kind of trauma, the same kind of past,
mhm,
that is also incredibly healing to trauma.
mhm,
And for myself, when going to 12 step groups where you talk about something terrible that happened to you or that you did, and to have a room full of people either smile in a loving way, or even, clap because they recognize and identify with something that you did. They're just like, how is this even possible? And,
mhm.
and, and I actually think sometimes that the 12 step groups that I have frequented for the last 3 decades is actually where the shame free zone was birthed, because it was my first experience of not being shamed for my
Mm,
feelings, and where I first experienced that I could talk about things from my past that were painful, and
yeah.
also painful emotions from today.
It's not like they magically go away, right?
Well,
But
life keeps
part
life
of.
on life's terms. I mean, life is still happening, and if anything we found out this last 12 months, the entire globe was having the same nightmare.
Mm,
Um,
yeah.
So I mean,
Well,
really,
one
this
of.
is this is kind of a timely topic, Pia, when you think about people have been somewhat traumatized by this last year because they lost a lot of their
Absolutely, the
social
whole
security.
globe.
Yeah.
But when you talk about when you just shared about your 12-step program and people smiling and looking at you, and this is one of the key things about being in groups, and that is that to be mirrored back. And
Yes.
very often, as we grew up, when we grew up in dysfunctional families, there was, and this is not a dig at any parent at all. I want to just also be very clear, because parents do the best they can with what they have, what they're dealt with, right? but inside of that, when there's dysfunction in the family, a lot of the time everyone's just kind of, you know, trying to keep their head above water. And so there's not really room for the child having emotions, because that's just adding to the troubles that are already in the family. So part of the good girl for me was that there was no room for being honest about how I felt, because that's just going to cause more problems. So if I felt lonely, or I felt sad, or even angry for that matter, that would never be, I would never in a million years express that in the family.
Oh, when I was 11, I told my parents that I was depressed. And their response was to walk me up in the middle of a rainy night to a little five and dime to buy me a paper doll set. I remember thinking, oh, these are so not the people to tell this to. It's like, oh yeah, paper dolls, that'll do it. And by the way, what part of I'm 11 didn't you catch? But anyway, yeah,
Mm.
it could be not safe in families of origin to share your feelings for a lot of reasons. I also know that sometimes I would say I was cold or hungry, and my father would just say, "No, you're not." So, what do you do with that?
Yeah.
It's like, okay, so I don't feel what I feel,
Yeah.
and
Or I'm scared, and there's nothing to be scared about. I could
right,
have sworn I was scared. It's like
yeah.
just not having our, our essence be validated. And of course, the challenge with what you're sharing now is that then we learn not to trust ourselves.
So true, so true.
You're not
Absolutely,
cold.
yeah.
Oh, but and then suddenly now I cannot trust that. I cannot trust that I'm feeling sad, or whatever that is. And of course, you said earlier, and then we bring all of this into our adult lives. And of course, when we can't trust ourselves, when we're looking for cues to how to live our life to everybody else, because the good girl is like, how can I
Mm.
make Veronica happy, or how can I please my husband, or whatever that is. And it never then becomes about me, because it's about everybody else.
Well, good
So
girls are great chameleons, don't you think? Where they just like, oh, you like that sports team, then I like that sports team, or you're laughing at that, then I'll laugh at that. It's like very, very chameleon like too.
yeah, well, but because it is a survival mechanism.
Yeah, yeah,
And one of the, coming back to your question about courage and everything, one thing that I find is a running thread, in fact, with probably at least 90% of all my clients, but around also the good girl, is no personal boundaries.
mm,
Because of course it's all about everybody else. So the chameleon comes in, it's like, I don't know what I need. I don't know what's okay and what isn't, because I want to ask you what's okay for you. So I've most of the time then I don't ask myself, is this okay for me or not? Or can you come closer or not? Or do you want to have sex right now? And I'm like, yeah, I do, because I want to please you, or whatever that looks like. Or if it's at work, you work yourself to the ground because you can't say no to do overtime 4 days a week.
Oh, you mentioned sex, and I just want to say I have worked with so many good girls who say yes to sex they don't want
Mm,
in and in particular in long-term relationships, whether they're living with their partner or married to their partner. They don't actually desire the sex, don't actually want the sex, and yet they're saying yes to it to try to please him or keep the marriage going.
mm,
And also, you know, not being able to find what might work for them, what they would actually want. And I've never had a problem expressing my desires. Well, let me say that. Have I ever? Oh, college. I was a mess in college. I had lots of sex just to feel wanted and loved, and it was
mm,
unsatisfactory, bad sex. But since I was 29 and got into the sex industry, I became very much my own my own navigator of my sexual reality, and stepped into a place of power around that, and became really acquainted with what I liked and what I didn't like, what I wanted and didn't want. Um, and I really, am helping a lot of my clients of any gender, frankly, to connect with their true desire. It's quite a journey to get there.
Mm.
But I'll tell you where I have difficulty still is around food, because I developed an eating disorder when I was doing all that cocaine and became anorexic, and lost the ability to tell when I'm hungry. So, and also sometimes thirsty. I just don't take care of bodily needs. So I have this little house plant I keep an eye on, and when she starts to wilt, I know I am too. And I'm like, oh, she needs to be watered. I go water the plant, and I know it sounds a little silly, but I'm like using the house plant as a way to remind myself that I'm living in a body that actually needs food, water, and sleep.
Mm.
Yes. Do you?
Well,
I would think you probably deal with some people who have eating disorders too, yes?
less so. I haven't. I have less experience with that, but I think more. I can lean it more towards just like general self care,
Mhm, mhm.
right? And so, of course, food
Yeah.
food is a really big part, and of course also sleep is a big part of that. And I think part of not having boundaries is that you could easily get wear yourself down to the ground, right? For just not being able to say no,
Yeah, yeah.
right? And that.
Well, and that's so one of the reasons, yes, you were talking about there's good boys and good girls. But I think one of the reasons that we're focusing on good girls today is because there's a cultural um, expectation that women do emotional labor for other people, particularly for men. Um,
Mhm.
right? And emotional labor is basically um, kind of taking care of somebody who doesn't know how to take care of their own emotions. So if they get angry, you try to calm them down. If they're feeling sad and lonely, you try to soothe them. And I have worked with lots of men who don't even know what they're feeling. They're having an experience of life through the woman in their life, because she has feelings, she has access to feelings, and that puts
Mm.
a lot of strain on their connection with their female partner. And obviously, I'm talking about heteronormative uh, realities right now, but I do want to say
Mm.
sometimes when I'm talking about male female roles, this also translates to gay and lesbian relationships, because um, it's in it's in the water. Damn it. Um, it's like this dynamic gets played out, and it really doesn't matter what you got in your pants. There's a way in which the masculine feminine dynamic is getting played out through codependency, through the good girl um, um, syndrome, as you refer to it.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts about that, Pia?
Well, you know, it's interesting because we were recently, it was at Easter, we went to visit a family, and they've got three kids living at home, two boys and a girl. And I just noticed very quietly, I saw that the young girl, I guess, yeah, she was the middle one. The young girl, she was helping in the kitchen, she was tidying up, she was emptying the dishwasher. And it really struck me. Wow, this is still going on. It's 2021 and it's still going on. The girls automatically are expected somehow to be emotionally or or otherwise helping out in the home.
Oh, oh,
And I was
yeah.
quite surprised, I have to say.
Well,
I really
just
thought that we had.
ah, you got hope someday. but so the stuff needs to get done, the dishes needs to get done, the house needs to be cleaned, but we still have a discrepancy now where um the average working woman in a relationship with a man is going to invest another 3.5 4 hours a week into housework that he doesn't do. So yeah, that's still going on, and the good girl's gonna get it done, right?
Well, you know, I was I was single for a long time into my adult life until I finally met my now husband. And I had to do a lot of work on my, my journey. Um, and I'm happy to say that I've actually attracted a guy that, we work quite well together. We don't have this kind of I do this and he does that, and we very much work together, and that's really become my reality. But I do see that, like I shared earlier, that sometimes I kind of sneak in different ways. So it's not necessarily,
Yeah.
oh, I'm doing the dishes or I'm doing the cooking. We do a lot of stuff together like that, but I still see that this need to be needed, this need to be special, this need to make, the codependent pull that whatever I give, I get something in return. It still kind of sneaks in the back door sometimes.
Yes, and Pia, one of the things that I know about my own codependency is it has a groove in there that's not just about being, trying to make sure everybody's happy and fix things. That's how one way it shows up. But beneath that, underneath the layer of codependency, I think is oftentimes control issues, because codependency is about trying to control outcomes, control people, and sometimes that can turn into a pattern I've seen a lot in myself, in other women that I have worked with, which is kind of that the house is mine. And if you are going to vacuum or do the dishes, you better do it my way. So then even if other members of the family or your partner join in, they're not necessarily empowered to own it as their own. Now they're kind of working for you, and they've opened themselves up to possibly being corrected or supervised. Have you ever noticed that pattern in codependency of trying to control others?
I've seen it in myself,
Ah, yeah, yeah.
and in fact, just still quite strongly in me this illusion that I am in control. And I think COVID, which we're recording this interview while the pandemic is still very much happening, has been a great reminder of how little I am in control.
Boy, is that the truth?
But I still fall into that pattern of trying to control my surroundings, and I totally get that the control is very much a survival mechanism for so many of us. Like, if we didn't find a way to control the outcome in our families,
Mm.
that was gonna, for many of us, that would be a great risk to our well-being. And
Yes.
so, like you said at the beginning of this interview, where you said, we bring all this into our adult lives, a lot of what we think is, well, this is who I am, this is my personality, and we think that it's normal. It's just what we've carried with us for so long. And I think part of our journey and our role in adult life is to start questioning, actually asking, well, what what is true for me? Who am I really? I mean, I know that's a big question, and you can sit for 21 days asking who I am, but I'm talking
21 days, try 21 years.
yeah, but I think to be willing to be curious to see what is really my truth. What is really the truth behind my the structures that I have created in my life, the control structures, or the roles that I play, or how I've kind of placed my chess pieces in my life, to
Yeah,
start questioning.
yeah.
And in my case, I had I ended up in the dark night of the soul that brought me on this journey.
Mhm.
And I think many people similar to me have had to go to somewhere so painful that that's how their journey starts. But for many, you don't have to go to the dark night of the soul to just start kind of looking to see, well, is this really working for me? Is this bringing me what I really need? Is this bringing me the joy or the peace or the connection that I'm wanting with my beloved, let's say? Well, actually, no, I'm not feeling the connection. And then, okay, then that leads to another question. Well, what is going to bring connection? Well, I've got to come back, and for so many, the first step is to start connecting with the self before you even think about anybody else.
Yeah. Connection to self, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And that
Mm,
and to me, that's actually the most difficult journey. Um,
mm,
eh, you know, I think that I might have a more of a burden in that department than some people, because of an incredibly abusive past. My childhood really was constantly, I was being told that I was inadequate or inappropriate or unwanted. So that
mm,
that was a pretty consistent message, and that's a lot to overcome. But I think most of the people that I work with, and of course, they come to me with their problems. So I'm not saying that's a fair sample from the world, but I I think the vast majority of us have got places where we think this part of me is unlovable. This part of me doesn't.
absolutely.
I can't show it because it won't be loved.
Mm-mm.
And I agree with you, Pia. I think we start by loving that ourselves. Can we reclaim that part of us that we have rejected, that part of us that we pushed away? Can we find ways to be compassionate and curious about parts of ourselves that we don't like? And
Mm,
and as somebody who has perpetrated domestic violence, I've done something that I regret that I don't ever want to do again, and I'm quite certain I won't because I got into recovery about it. But I know that the path to healing required me to be curious and compassionate about the part of me that did things that I'm not happy that I did.
mm,
um and it actually becomes an insurance policy. So there's a lot of fear that if I love myself, warts and all, then I won't change, I won't do better. And my experience has been it's just the reverse. The more you try to push away the parts of yourself that you don't like, the more power they have over your behavior and your future.
mm.
And when you can go in there and love that part, um, then you get to grow out of it.
Yeah. And on my journey, coming back to what we talked about with groups,
Yeah.
that has been such a saving grace. And I have memories, for example, of being curled up in a ball in
Mm.
front of a group where I was doing um, exposure work, which means literally exactly what you're talking about, like that, those parts that there's no way in hell I'm going to be loved after this.
Yeah.
If I expose this, it's game over.
Yeah.
And without a doubt, the mirroring of love, of compassion, of respect, of recognition that I see myself in you and we are the same, etc. It's so nourishing. Those moments are so nourishing. So in fact, for me, it's very much been a kind of reliance of having that mirroring. I mean,
Yeah.
of course, along the way, just lots of therapy as well. But where it's really been tested when I'm just so afraid I'm not going to be loved, and and learning to love myself in the process
Yes. Yeah.
has just been just I yeah, you can tell I have no words to describe that
Yeah.
because there's so much value in those moments, and the strength and the richness that comes from that. And then every time it gets a little bit easier and a little bit easier, but never so easy that I don't break out in a sweat, or I don't get, I don't feel a little bit shaky or whatever.
Yeah.
But each time it's like something is reborn inside of me almost. Like some forgotten part gets to come alive.
That was the word that I was gonna say. It is a rebirth, and
Mm,
and that, to me, being on a journey of self-exploration and recovery and healing and unpacking all this stuff has it's been rebirthing, rebirthing, rebirthing.
mm.
So that, we our organs change their cells every few years. Our skin is sloughing off all the time. Nature wants to rebirth itself all the time. That's why the leaves fall off and then they come back in the spring. This entire planet, this plane of existence, is predicated on rebirth. and
Mm,
and I think, as humans, to really enroll ourselves in that we're going to rebirth ourselves, that we're going to really be looking for ways, and that's what keeps us young and vibrant and flexible and engaged and alive and conscious. Do you see it that way too, Pia?
totally. And I remember many, many moons ago, I used to work for Tony Robbins, you know, the big guy.
Yes.
And I remember in one of the things he was talking about, I said that exactly what you talked about now with with all our organs. And the organ that I don't remember which organ it was, but the organ that takes the longest is 7 years. So essentially every 7 years you are a totally new person. And
Right.
if we could let go of all that, we can also then let go of this idea we have that we have to stay the same. This is who I am. And I mean, it's so exciting to me actually to go, wow, what else is there?
Yes, and just to be clear, you and I are not talking about the kind of letting go that's just a spiritual bypass, like, oh yeah, that's in the past, I'm over it. It's like, if that's what you say, that's in the past, I'm over it, you're not over it.
Hmm.
You really want to do the healing journey, which is, it's the price of admission for this rebirth. Imagine if a snake was shedding its skin. That's how they rebirth themselves. For a few moments, and what probably seems like a lifetime to the snake, they're completely blind and they're defenseless.
Hmm.
And so there is a vulnerability and in that process, that's, yeah, and I'm coming back to when you talk about the courage, Pia, the
Yeah.
courage to be reborn into your new self, and that requires curiosity and compassion for the parts of you that are wounded.
Hmm. And I wish I remember, I don't know if it was Glennon Doyle that was saying that courage comes from the Latin root that's heart. I can't quote it exactly, but it's something like that. And I think that's so beautiful because courage requires us to be in the heart. It's almost like Braveheart, you know, like to find our courage here, where the heart is feels like that's where our essence is. So the essence is really that's not going to go away. It's actually a coming back to, you know, removing any of those layers that actually don't belong to us, things that have been impressed upon us or what's happened to us that is not who we are.
I keep going back in my own journey as it's showing up right now. I go back to when I was 4 years old. And the reason I go back to 4 years old is because that's before my father molested me. And how I felt in my body and about myself at 4 was, I thought that my no mattered. I thought my body was my own, that I was entitled to have boundaries.
Mm,
And I really liked me. So the journey has been me reconnecting with that little 4 year old and
mm,
feeling inspired and supported by her. Like, she's really a kick ass little girl. Um, and bringing bits of that into my adult reality so that I can reconnect that. Because one of the things I think that causes us shame is we start to think that we are what we did or we
mm.
are what was done to us.
Yeah.
And we're not. We are not what we have done, and we are not what has been done to us. We're bigger than that.
Mm.
Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, that touches me when you say that.
Mm.
It really rings true. And I see again and again, that see around me, people that this comfort zone of just staying on the surface, but it's so flat, it's so um lacking of texture and temperature and feeling, and when we just stay on this flat surface. And big part of also what I do with clients is to get them to come back into their body, right? And to re-engage the language of the senses, like the felt sense, and to start listening to this incredible wisdom that's in our body here. And like you mentioned, the body keeps the score.
Yeah.
That fantastic book. But I think that again we are learned in school, in our education system, to just stay here. And of course, the mind is often lying. And then our critic comes in, the superego comes in, and is also lying. But the body doesn't lie. So although of course when your dad told you you're not cold, he
Yes.
was the one lying. But like we can like big part of getting intimate with yourself is just get intimate now with the language of the body, because sometimes you don't have words, but the body has language. So you might you might say yes, like somebody with that doesn't have is working on their boundaries and can't say no and says yes, but then noticing something just happened in the body. I'm
Yes.
going to listen to that voice, because the voice of the body is so much more wise and true than anything that our fickle mind can come up with.
I am so glad that you brought that up. I'm really glad you brought that up, because my own healing journey has involved a lot of body work. My
Mm.
favorite one is rolfing. It's a little extreme for some people.
Oh, yep. Know it well.
But it's been so good for me. I've unpacked hospital trauma from when I was 2, and all kinds of trauma that's just it's stuck in the tissues.
Hmm.
And and for sexological body workers also are working with trauma in the sexual tissues, which is another. I'm not certified in that, but I know the man who started the certification process, Joseph Kramer, and it's spread around the world, and it's created a lot of healing for people who are sexual assault survivors, or
Mm.
just had a Me Too moment in their life and are looking for ways, or maybe even it didn't cross that path, but I have worked with lots of people of all genders, who have allowed touch on their body that has gradually shut them down so that their pleasure is diminished. And I'm really on a mission to try to help people, get their no, a really healthy no that creates intimacy and heart connection. And
Mm.
because without that, we're just not going to say no, because we all want to be loved and we all want to stay connected. and
Yeah,
and and I think that's a big problem. So
yeah.
yeah.
I remember one time I was receiving Rolfing, and he massaged the inside of my mouth.
Uh-huh, I've
And
heard
it
that's never happened to me, but I've heard how was that for you?
it was very painful. I mean, I have a fairly high pain threshold, because I've had a lot of very deep uh, rolfing, but also this myofascial, very deep tissue, and it's such a beautiful addition, like the modality, like you're saying, like let's say somebody's coming to you for sessions, and then they also then work the body to get rid of some of this tension that is sitting in the system. And of course, with trauma, often we don't we don't have the capacity necessarily to complete the stress cycle, so the fight flight freeze, so everything then gets stuck in the system. So unless you then find a way to get rid of all that tension that is the trauma that's sitting in your body,
Right.
you're
And
not gonna you're not no matter how much therapy you're doing, it's not gonna be enough. You need to
it'll
work on the body level as
a
well.
absolutely. So yoga is great for that. Body work, like rolfing, sexological body work. I also teach my clients an orgasmic practice. It's a self-pleasuring practice where they can use orgasm to release emotions, even grief. Believe it or not, I mean it's a wonderful tool. I'm wondering, can you tell us a little bit more about the breath work that you provide?
Mm-hmm. Sure. It's called Biodynamic Breath and Trauma Release. And it's created by a wonderful therapist called Giten Tonkov. He's a friend and also teacher. And there's lots of different type of breath work out there. Some people just will, for example, my dad, he calls it breath work, but it's a way to just breathe into where there's a pain, so that imagining that you're bringing more oxygen to the area where there's pain, and you can release some of that pain. When it comes to biodynamic breath and trauma release systems, it's a specific breath modality to activate the nervous system in order to release the trauma. So
Uh-huh.
we when we work with people face to face, it's an open mouth, equal length of inhalation as exhalation. That's important. So it looks something like this, like this. Now, what this does, it activates our system in such a way that with also we include meditation, we also include body work. So if I'm giving a session to somebody, I might touch them in a certain area where I'm either they may have shared that let's say they're feeling that there's a stuckness in the belly, so I might put some pressure to activate that area, or I might, if they're having issues with expression, I might do some body work on the jaw. And interestingly, we also the ocular belt, because we actually work on 7 belts of tension in the body. I don't know if you've heard of Willem Reich.
Mm.
I think he's from back in the 30s or something, but he named 7 belts of tension.
Oh,
One
you're
of them
talking about
is,
you just said the name, Deborah. Of course, he's a famous psychologist.
yes, yeah. So he
Well,
talked about the ocular belt. We
yeah.
actually start here and move down versus, the chakra system, it's the other way around. And we actually use when you talked about EMDR, we use a form of, it's not body work, but it's activated. They have to follow.
Yes.
We put a dot on our finger, and they have to follow without moving the head, follow the
Ah,
our
right.
finger. And that's a way, again, to stimulate anything that's stuck here in the ocular belt. So in nature, animals that experience a fright or a trauma, like an antelope that's caught by a lion,
Right.
so they're flighting,
Shake
they're
it off.
running away from the, yeah, they're running away
And
from the
they
lion.
also shake it off.
Exactly. But what often happens is, let's imagine that the lion catches the antelope. Now it's going to play dead. So now it's freezing, and it's just waiting for the lion to go, well, that was easy. Takes a break, and that's when it flees again. And then when it's safe, exactly what you said, it shakes it out. It's
Yeah.
just a total natural response. And so animals do not hold the trauma in their flesh. we do. You go to a scene of an accident, and often when the person who's had the accident, they will be given some sort of sedative to calm themselves, and so
Yes.
the natural instinct to shake does not happen. Although sometimes when we get scared, we might shake a little bit, right?
Right.
So what we do, we have the client do this continuous, it's like a cycle, the in and out breath.
Uh-huh.
It's not necessary, sometimes they might shake, but it's a release of energy, and energy can be anything. It can be, I mean, for example, I have screamed with laughter, and that's just another way of releasing energy. um I mean, I've also had just absolute tremors like this. But the beauty of this particular, what I love the most is because I can be quite mindy. I mean, I've 20 years, 20 plus years, I've worked on being in my emotions, but I also can very easily get stuck here. With the breath work, you don't need to know what you're releasing.
Mhm.
You just trust the body to do the work. If it's a voice, maybe you just need to vocalize something. Ah, just make a sound.
Uh,
Sometimes it's a matter you start kicking your legs, and that can be, your trauma, you weren't able to kick somebody off you, and therefore the system, you can't make this stuff up, the body does it, and the body then starts kicking, and that's just completing that stress cycle, is completing what you were unable to do when you experience the trauma, and the expansion that becomes available, the relaxation, the kind of inner and outer freedom that I personally have experienced, but also seen that in clients that I've worked with. It's phenomenal. It's but you're not going into sort of altered state with this particular type of breath work. It's, in fact, the design of it is bringing in quite a bit of somatic experiencing. So
uh,
it's very much about being present here and now. So, for example, if I'm giving you a session and you go into catharsis, I will actually stop you, and I will ask you perhaps to start breathing through the nose to calm the nervous system, so that you come back to being present. Because it's not about freaking out, it's about really being here and now in your body as you allow the body to do its work.
wow.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
that's very
beautiful.
different. So it's not like some of the breath techniques that, like you say, create an altered state, and so then you're not really in the body anymore.
Yeah, this is all about being in the body.
Sounds daunting.
It's actually beautiful.
Yeah.
It's actually beautiful, and I can only speak for myself,
Right.
but my experience of just becoming more familiar with my body,
Yeah.
that's really been through the breath work.
Yes.
And as you really encourage the breath, like I said earlier, it opens up the whole world, the feeling world,
Right. Yeah.
and
Well, and that's
feeling
and that's what
aliveness.
yes, and I think people want more. They have like this inner craving for more.
Mm,
And really I think the more is on the other side of this work. When we start to open ourselves up, we start to feel more, we start to be more, we start to experience more.
mm.
Life, it's kind of like you were talking about, when people are just surface, it's kind of black and white, it's dull. And then when you go deeper and you start to free up these energies and heal your past and move beyond it and expand, life is in color
Yeah.
and it's
And when
beautiful.
you said that, one thing that having been for so many years now becoming befriending my emotions, the beauty of that in my life at least is that I don't linger there, because I embrace them, so then I can really feel them, and then I don't need to linger there. So for example, with my husband, for example, I can get irritated at him, and then I kind of stomp my feet, but I don't hold on to it. I kind of speak my truth, and then I can let go and get on with my day. And that just frees up so much energy that can be spent on creativity or pleasure or enjoy, whatever that is.
Oh, I think the good girl, coming back to our topic here, I think the good girl she could be doing so many more things in the world if she wasn't busy being good.
Yeah. I mean, there's room for her, but really
There is, there is.
the
Look,
good
I was a
girls and
straight A
boys.
student. I don't want to lose the part of me that was a straight A student, but perfectionism it can be limiting too.
Yeah, and perfectionism is goes hand in hand with shame really anyway. So
You are so
it,
right about that, Pia.
it's not really a place to be either.
No.
But I think one of my highest values is personal freedom. And so for me, that means the freedom on the inside. So whatever I'm going to do, be it my body work or breath work or doing that exposure work, whatever that is, ultimately it's that feeling of freedom to be who I was sent here to be, born into this life to be. And
That's
that's not a good girl. That is an alive being who who knows what's okay and who knows what's not okay, who can speak her truth,
yes.
but also be humble and be loving and compassionate towards other people. But I have to put myself first, and the good girl does the opposite. So that journey took a long time for me, but that's really the prize, is that you don't have to not care and love other people. You don't have to throw your care for other people away when you reclaim yourself, but you've got to put yourself first.
And actually, I think you probably would agree with this, but let's see. Um, the level of caring that you can have for other people when you put yourself first is actually increased. You're actually able to show up with more love, not less,
Hmm.
because it's coming
Because
from,
you're filled up.
yes, and it's coming from a place of authentic bounty instead of a need, fear. It's not fear based anymore.
Yeah.
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 Well, Pia, it's been awesome having you in the shame
I
free zone.
know, it's so fun. I think
Well,
you and I could probably sit here for another couple of
oh,
hours.
I'm sure we could. And if we were doing a Rich Roll podcast, maybe we would. I don't know how it is he keeps his going for 2 hours, because to me, I want to make sure people don't get too fatigued, and especially we're taking on very intense topics.
Hmm.
Um, I am going to put all your links at the bottom, but if you want to call out some of your links verbally right now, just so people can find you, I'm sure some people would love to get a treatment for some of that breath work that you do. It sounds awesome and transformative. So how
You know,
can
the easiest place, I'm just in the process of getting a new website, so I'm not going to send them to my old website, but I would, for any of the ladies listening, sorry,
yes,
gents, I have a private Facebook group, and there you have absolute direct daily access to me if you wish to engage, if you just wish to be in my community, and it's called the Evolving Women's Collective. That's a private
Evolving
Facebook group.
Women's Collective. What a great
Yeah,
name.
yeah.
Yeah,
So
awesome.
you have total access to me there, and at this point in time, that's the easiest place to go. And again, I'm building this beautiful collective, a community there. So it's a lovely place to hang out as well.
So good girls and bad girls are welcome there.
Most girls are welcome there. Good
Okay.
girls, bad girls, naughty girls, cheeky girls.
Any kind of girl. That's great.
Yeah.
Great. Well, what time is it in Germany right now?
11:45.
Honey, I just want to thank you so much for meeting me here on this platform. You know, it's only afternoon here. Um, and you stayed up late for this, and you've just stayed so engaged and bright, and I'm just so grateful to you. Thank you.
Hmm. Well, this is not our first conversation, and it just keeps on getting better. So it's absolutely my absolute honor and pleasure to have this conversation with you, and hopefully some of our listeners that are chiming in will gain some value from our beautiful conversation. Thank you, Veronica.
Thank you, Pia. And we'll do it again.
Yay, let's do it again.
Let's do it again. All right. Bye for now.